How did one player defeat half the game? And should we remember them and their followers as legends or as trolls? This sounds ridiculous to most of you, but someone really did this. They defeated a coalition of 600 and destroyed thousands of dollars worth of in-game assets. Our story begins in January of 2018, with a game divided between Easy Mode Coalition, EMC for short, and the Inquisition. EMC had all the largest nations, the biggest banks, and the best fighters, whereas the Inquisition were rebels, with smaller nations, small banks, and a lackluster military reputation. This was not a fair fight, and the leader of EMC knew this. Partisan and his inner circle reacted to the rebellion by trying and failing to disband EMC. All they managed to do was weaken it, and create a third coalition, which I'll be calling Hogwarts Plus after his alliance. If you're new to politics and war, you might not be familiar with score and tiering. Basically, as your nation buys more cities and becomes more powerful, your score increases. Lower tier refers to nations with a low score, mid tier refers to nations with an average score, and high tier refers to nations with a large score. The Inquisition was strong in the mid tier, and Easy Mode was strong in the high tier. It required a lot of skill to escape the trappings of the score system and attack nations outside your tier, so there hadn't been a war between them in almost a year. Hogwarts was also in the high tier and was considered a sort of kingmaker. Whichever side they supported would win the next war. So they picked a side and walked home with a trophy, right? Nope. They wanted to shake things up.
Introduce a little anarchy.
Instead of picking a side, they planned to attack one of the alliances allied to both EMC and the Inquisition, and see how they reacted. The plot went a little something like this. Hogwarts was going to attack UPN, a neutral alliance allied to both of the spheres, Inquisition and Easy Mode, and catch them both in a prisoner's dilemma. If they both retaliated against Hogwarts, then they lose the chance to ally them. If they both ignore Hogwarts' attack, then they are breaking their diplomatic commitments, which is a big no-no. I refer you to my previous video on norms for why that's a terrible idea. So the most likely possibility is that one side defends UPN and the other does not, in which case the side that chooses not to help UPN will gain Hogwarts as an ally, and Hogwarts was much stronger than UPN. It's almost a perfect trap. The big weakness is that if it's leaked, then Hogwarts gets rolled by both of them. I wonder what this is. For some reason, they didn't immediately get punished for plotting against the two largest coalitions in the game's history. Instead, their allies chose to start fighting each other and a bunch of their members went inactive. Hogwarts decided to intervene in the war between their allies. Sparta had attacked Grumpy, so Hogwarts chose to help the defender, and Sparta lost their war and disbanded afterwards. Turns out networking is a double-edged sword. Hogwarts was an important investor and had connections with many of the game's most important diplomats. When they were succeeding, this influence made them appealing to join and work with. When they were failing, every important person in the game was quick to denounce them and convince them to flee the sinking ship. Sensing blood in the water, EMC decided to militarize and attack Hogwarts for plotting against them and UPN. A severely weakened Hogwarts sent most of its members to one of EMC's allies, the Alliance Nuclear Knights, and played possum. EMC saber-rattled a bit but eventually decided it wasn't worth attacking them. Terminal jest. All of these events led to a goodbye party for Partisan. At least that's how Abbas described it, when he helped recruit people for Hogwarts' last war, their last hurrah. During their drunk party planning, they decided to rename the Alliance Terminal Jest, and for the Inquisition to be the target of their war. Why did they pick the Inquisition? There are two competing theories which may both be true. 1. According to Partisan, it was simply an easier target than EMC. 2. According to the Inquisition, Partisan was trying to get back into EMC's good books by weakening them before their next war against EMC. A few weeks went by and Terminal Jest reached 25 members. All but one of these members was in the high tier, which as I mentioned in the start of this video, the Inquisition wasn't strong in. The Inquisition had like 50 nations in the high tier, and a few hundred in the mid tier. Terminal Jest was outnumbered, but they were striking where their enemy was weakest. The Inquisition knew that they were probably the target, but ruled out a preemptive strike. There were rumors, perhaps created by Partisan, that Terminal Jest was going to launch a revenge war on EMC. It was complete nonsense, but it did the job. So the day of the war arrived. Terminal Jest launched an amazing blitz that instantly destroyed the Inquisition's high tier and huge swathes of their mid tier. Terminal Jest broke one of the most important rules of Alliance warfare. Usually you limit the number of offensive wars you declare so that you don't overextend and lose all of your military units instantly. 2 or 3 offensive wars is the most you should have. But Terminal Jest wasn't really trying to win, and they took a note from Reddit's Art of War. What's an exit strategy? Terminal Jest's members launched 5 offensive wars each, and were quickly countered by 3 defenders each, so almost every member of Terminal Jest was engaged in 8 wars. This should have been a recipe for disaster, but the attack was so surprising that it worked. In any other game, this would have been a bad first day of a long war. In Politics and War, this pretty much guaranteed Terminal Jest a few weeks of victory. Terminal Jest won all their offensive wars before their defensive ones even started. The game limits the number of nations that can attack a single target to 3 at a time. If all 3 are defeated but their wars don't end, the target can attack other nations without any fear of reprisal. Partisan had succeeded in recreating the 300, and the memes were glorious. One meme in particular stood out: Borhan the Khan of Terminal Jest. Borhan was the one nation in Terminal Jest that was in the mid-tier, and he should have lost all his wars. He had no right winning any of them, with how outnumbered he was. No one else in Terminal Jest could help him because of the score system, and somehow he survived a week before his military got destroyed. Borhan became a hero of Terminal Jest propaganda, and then transformed into something more. He had a really simple profile picture, a green hippo, and it became the mascot of their alliance as much as Partisan's snake profile picture. He wasn't particularly important before the war, but by the end of it people were joking that he was the leader, as much, if not more, than Partisan. But aside from the memes and the propaganda, this war eventually turned, and IQ started bringing them down one nation at a time. People started thinking about how this would all end, and what would come next. The Inquisition had a vision for the future. They envisioned Terminal Jest paying $5 billion in reparations, an unprecedented sum of money at the time, though only a fraction of the $42 billion they'd lost in that war, and the $20 billion Terminal Jest had lost. For context, the Inquisition lost roughly $2,000, and Terminal Jest lost $1,000, if you converted the in-game currency to US dollars using credits as a tool of measurement. Partisan was never going to pay reparations. The only time you pay reparations is when your alliance doesn't have an appetite for war, and when it wants to survive. Terminal Jest had a huge appetite for war, and had no intention of surviving it. Rather than fight a long war, Partisan chose to disband the alliance. Most of his members returned to EMC as heroes, and the Inquisition was left reeling. If the Inquisition chased down the former members of Partisan's alliance, they would deprive their rival EMC of fighters the next time they went to war. But this would also risk starting a war with EMC immediately, whilst they were at a serious disadvantage. Partisan's alliance members escaped the consequences of their war, and it served as inspiration for others to attack the Inquisition in the coming years. Partisan moved on to other projects soon after his alliance disbanded, but some of his former members wanted to do more, and this led them to founding the Golden Horde. A lot of the propaganda and ideological foundations of Terminal Jest transferred over to the Golden Horde, along with the members, and it went on to become one of the most prominent alliances in the game's history. And who led this successor alliance? The second star of Terminal Jest propaganda, Borhan. An almost average member went on to lead one of the most important alliances in the game's history, and it was all because they were active and participating. You don't have to be a great diplomat or a strategist. He probably wouldn't characterize himself as either. You just need to be a figure people can unite around, and capable of delegating responsibilities to those who can be great diplomats and strategists. When I was interviewing Partisan for this video, I asked him what he took away from this war, and I think these lessons will serve you as much as they served him, and conclude this video really well. In terms of propaganda and community management, the trolling and memes were not new as a concept, but they were very well executed and completely necessary. The strength of political momentum is often understated. If you are able to generate momentum in terms of the perception of success, failure, superiority, inferiority, that can go a long way to obtaining strategic goals. If Terminal Jest had lost the war, then they couldn't have split up and joined other alliances at the end. Why would EMC stick its neck out for people that can't fight well for them next war? And if the Inquisition had been more humorous, perhaps they'd have gained more support and undercut Terminal Jest's propaganda. The immediate response to the attack was basically condemnation, and it made them easy to troll and portray as sore losers. Neutrals could choose between a funny snake and a slightly toxic comment section. The choice was obvious. With that said, the Inquisition's reaction wasn't unnatural or unfair, it was just a poor strategic decision. And that's everything. I started this video months ago, and even finished a draft, but I hesitated to post it, because I didn't have enough information, and I wasn't confident in relying on the surface-level narratives on the forums and a partisan's testimony alone. I got a lot of details wrong in the first draft, pretty much all of them. It goes to show that much of the game's politics occurs in back channels. Relying on publicly available sources leads to shocking misconceptions. So as a disclaimer, some of this is probably wrong or incomplete. And guess what? We'll probably never find out. But I can live with that. History is never complete, and I'm just glad I could preserve all that I have in this video. I'm going to continue doing more of them, and piece by piece, story by story, will outline what makes Politics and More a unique and amazing slice of the internet.